The next item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 5957 in the name of Paul Martin on the community-based housing associations building the community. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. And I invite those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now or as soon as possible. And I call on Paul Martin to open the debate. 7 minutes, please. Mr. Martin.
Presiding Officer, first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank colleagues for their support in allowing this motion to come forward before us today. It should be noted that 5 of the political parties represented, apart from the SNP, supported this business motion today. Can I also welcome to the public gallery the representatives from the various community-based housing associations throughout Scotland. There are committee members and members of staff. And they are here today because they believe in the future of their local community, and what they will expect from the Minister today is not warm words of encouragement, not a carefully crafted speech by civil servants, not lame excuses, but a commitment to reverse the cuts that affect the future of their housing associations and make it impossible for our housing associations to continue the regeneration of our communities that's went on for some decades now. I'll give way in a second. The motion before us has been written in their behalf and to amplify some of their concerns and frustrations, and they want to know why they are no longer receiving the funding that would allow them to continue the regeneration of their communities. I'll bring John Mason in.
Well, I thank the member for giving way. If the member wants cuts reversed, can he tell us where he wants the money to come from? Is it out of the health service?
Paul Martin.
Presiding Officer, every single day, John Mason, like me, will receive many requests from constituents who want to be rehoused, and many of the community-based housing associations who are represented here today. I don't want to hear excuses. I want to hear commitments, and commitments that are there to ensure that this can continue. But let us be clear, Presiding Officer, since the 1970s, CBHAs have played a crucial role in regenerating our communities, particularly, and I refer to Glasgow. There are many communities that would not exist today were it not for the vision, tenacity and determination of these local communities. I can name many of them. I would be a long list of commitments, Presiding Officer. The Gorbals area would not be here today. The Springburn area that I was brought in would not be here today. South Denniston would not be here today, and the tenemental properties that John Mason represents. Those communities would not exist if it were not fair for their determination. Not only, though, did they build houses, they brought forward projects to support the people in them. They built community facilities, using their expertise in development, attracting funding from various sources, including lottery. They have been the boon for local employment. They have strengthened local economies. They have allowed social enterprises to flourish. All of these social and economic achievements were led, many of them, by community-based housing associations, tenants and owners who are members of their management committees. This is a proven success. It's a model that has a proven track record. What is clear from every piece of evidence that has been presented to this Parliament, indeed from what we can see on the ground, is that the community-based housing association model works. And yes, Presiding Officer, it requires public subsidy. It requires support from the government. It may not be the cheapest option, but you get what you pay for. We got the cheapest option when we built houses and estates like the Red Road and Sighthill. They were described in their day as being cost-effective solutions to providing housing. But the lack of an infrastructure and a lack of proper management meant that these houses are being torn down as we speak. Had there been the community control that we've seen in many of the other areas that I've referred to, I'm sure that these estates would have stood the test of time. My motion refers to what's happening in the real world. While demand for social housing is increasing rapidly, the Scottish Government is cutting the grant levels that are available to local housing associations to ensure that their development work can continue. This graph, provided to every single member in this chamber, Presiding Officer, illustrates clearly the kind of challenges that these housing associations face. When Labour left office in April 2007, the grant levels per new build property was just over 76,000. The SNP government have cut this to the present rate, which is just over 44,000 per unit, resulting in the CBHAs across Scotland withdrawing from development. And yes, they are withdrawing from development because they need the government financial support that will allow them to ensure that these schemes stack up. These cuts are putting at risk the very existence of our community-based housing association movement. The funding environment has led to the growth of housing associations masquerading as housing associations when in fact they're actually big business. What they are doing is operating from outside Scotland, and I'm afraid, Presiding Officer, their interest is not the interests of our local communities, as we have seen from the community-based housing association movement, but ensuring that they make a fast buck out of their investment. They might be able to come in and build the houses in the government and meet the targets that the government have set. They can do it as cheap as chips, but they won't be able to do it in the effective manner that our CBHA movements have done for many years. Now, Presiding Officer, my call to the Scottish Government today is very clear. Reverse the cuts that have been placed on our local housing associations and let them get on with the job of regenerating our local communities and protecting this investment that's been in place for nearly 4 decades, ensuring that many of our communities are able to provide good and ample social housing for our local communities to live in.
Many thanks. I now call on Kenneth Gibson to be followed by Dr Elaine Murray.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to congratulate Paul Martin on securing today's debate. The role of community-based housing associations is integral to the delivery and management of high-quality housing stock in Scotland, and the Scottish Government has worked closely with housing associations and local authorities to increase the availability of socially rented and affordable housing across the country. Of course, the collapse in the housing market and the UK Government's frankly misguided decision to cut public spending with capital and resource has had a profound impact and set particularly difficult challenges and problems which this Government has had to react to and seek to mitigate against. The challenges in delivering a housing programme are many and varied: changing demographics, energy efficiency, house types, changing household size, changes to the welfare system, financing and the blend between socially rented and homes for ownership must all be taken into account. Unlike Westminster, the Scottish Government has prioritised the delivery of social and affordable housing and achieved a great deal despite a 26% cut in available capital. So despite unprecedented budgetary constraints, we are nevertheless 2 years into our 5-year target of delivering 30,000 additional affordable homes. The Government is on course to meet this commitment, having worked with local authorities and housing associations to deliver almost 12,900 affordable homes so far, almost 10,000 of which are for social rent. In order to encourage an increase in house building, the Government reduced the level of subsidy per unit delivered through the Innovation and Investment Fund. This reflects the fact that building costs are currently significantly lower than in previous years and encourages providers to make full use of other resources available to them. This is a sensible approach during such straitened times and ensures a maximum return for taxpayers' money. It should also be remembered that the Scottish Government recently launched a £10 million house building infrastructure loan fund to unlock stalled sites. The fund awarded loan support to 9 projects across Scotland with scope to deliver over 1,100 new homes and the potential to provide a further 800 in subsequent phases. This will ensure increased provision of stock, helping to satisfy demand and also preventing increased rent levels. Furthermore, in response to demand from councils and developers, a further procurement round of the groundbreaking National Housing Trust Initiative has been launched. This scheme allows developers and councils to jointly fund the purchase of new homes with local authority loans to the initiative underwritten by the Scottish Government. Already, approvals have been secured for over 1,300 homes, with 300 already complete and hundreds more currently on site. Whilst increasing the housing stock remains a priority, the Scottish Government has introduced many more measures to stimulate the housing market and improve existing stock. For example, the Scottish Government recently committed £120 million over 2 years to support a new shared equity scheme to help first-time buyers and those looking to buy a new home. Additional funding in the last budget was also allocated to programmes such as adaptations, up 25% on last year, and retrofitting properties with energy-efficient measures to reduce fuel poverty and improve tenants' lives. The Scottish Government is also providing £2.5 million to social landlords to help tenants access the advice and assistance they need following the implementation of the regressive bedroom tax. Of course, as we know, the Labour Party has continuously called for more investment in housing, as they have in every other sphere of public spending. Indeed, Ken McIntosh called for all additional resources received in Barnett consequentials to be spent on housing at the expense of education, health, justice and infrastructure, whilst Margaret McDougall called for tens of thousands of one-bedroom flats to be miraculously built in the 6-month period running up to the imposition of the bedroom tax. New initiatives and innovative funding methods are being pioneered by this Scottish Government, and it is evident that the Government is committed to improving and expanding Scotland's affordable housing stock, and it will work with community housing associations, local authorities and others to ensure that its achievements thus far are built upon. Thank you.
Many thanks. I now call on Dr Lane Murray to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I'd like to also congratulate Paul Martin on bringing this very important subject to the Chamber today. Community-controlled housing associations were first set up in Glasgow in the 1970s and 80s. They were characterised by the prevalence of tenants and residents on their boards and specialised in the renovation of older stock and the regeneration of neighbourhoods through accessing private sector funding not otherwise available to the public sector. The model subsequently became a feature of the social housing sector in Scotland, but remains particularly strong in Glasgow and the west of Scotland. When council housing stock was transferred to Glasgow Housing Association in 2003, the intention was for a two-tier stock transfer process, with a smaller second-stage stock transfer to local housing associations which would own and manage their own stock. This has happened to some extent, though perhaps not as quickly as had originally been expected. The community housing movement has delivered many benefits to neighbourhoods in Scotland. In addition to its central purpose of the provision of good quality affordable housing through renovation and new build, community housing has delivered investment in employment, community empowerment and local accountability. The sector has also supported community enterprises, education and training, childcare and community cultural events. However, smaller housing associations are particularly vulnerable to financial pressures. Paul Martin's motion highlights how the cut in development funding budget in Glasgow and the consequences for rents and borrowing costs. Now, Labour MSPs have on a number of occasions raised the concerns expressed by the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations and others to the reduction to the HAG grant from an average of 70,000 across Scotland to an average of 40,000, which, coupled with difficulties in accessing borrowing, are making the building of new homes for social rent more and more difficult. Payment after build instead of in stages also adds more pressures. SFHA estimate that the rent from a socially rented property only raises enough funds to cover a third of the cost of borrowing. The HAG grant covers another third of the cost, and the options to find the other third may have been in the past been through reserves and others, but those are running out and they are not an option for small community-controlled housing associations. And that is one of the reasons why last week I asked the Cabinet Secretary for Finance whether the consequentials arising from the financial transactions announced in the UK budget, which have to be used for equity or loans and must be repaid to the Treasury, could be used to provide loans to housing associations at lower costs than they can access through banks and other private sources, but to use those for the purpose of building homes for social rent. And I hope that the Government will be prepared to look into that possibility. Because the current situation is likely to have two consequences: community-controlled housing associations forced out of building and regeneration projects, or, as Paul Martin said, being taken over by large housing associations from other parts of the United Kingdom, and the loss of the character of the Scottish housing association sector. I'll give you a local example. 384 properties were transferred from Dumfries and Galloway Council to Irvine Housing Association back in 1999 after a vote from tenants, and it was a very successful stock transfer. That took the housing association stock to something around 1,900, and indeed they invested something like £12 million into regenerating the area and modernising the properties. The IHA took over a number of other properties and had a stock of around 2,000 tenants. But how now Irvine Housing Association has become a part of Riverside, based in Liverpool. Riverside has over 85,000 tenants and residents. Now, I don't know that housing association. It may be a perfectly fine one, but I am concerned, very concerned, that we will see these smaller community-based housing associations being taken over because they cannot survive the current financial situation, and their essential character within their own communities will be lost. I think Scotland should be proud of our tradition of community-controlled housing associations, but unfortunately the current funding regime threatens their ability to build new homes for affordable social rent, and may indeed possibly threaten their continued existence.
Many thanks. I now call on John Mason to be followed by Alex Johnson. 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and may I thank Paul Martin as well for bringing this important subject to the Chamber. I would have signed his motion, most of which I agreed with, except for the fact that he's blaming the Scottish Government for the cuts, which is clearly not the case. Presiding Officer, I worked a number of years for different housing associations, and I really believe they are a key player in our society, and perhaps the key player in poorer areas and constituencies like Paul Martin's and mine. And we do welcome a number of representatives to the Chamber today. I spoke earlier to, I know West of Scotland are here, Queen's Cross, Milnebank, and a number of others. In fact, I do not know of any other type of organisation in the third sector in my constituency that combines such a high level of voluntary involvement on the one hand with the level of professional resources that housing associations have. And having worked for and known housing associations of various sizes, I personally do favour associations with stock of under 3,000, which gives a good balance between professionalism and tenant control. I was never in favour of Glasgow Housing Association at all, which was always going to be too big, and I am disappointed when I hear of small local housing associations, including one recently in my own constituency, being swallowed up by giants from elsewhere. Housing is the #1 issue which constituents come to see me about, and it remains the top priority for me when it comes to capital spending priorities. And I would especially want to welcome the fact that the Commonwealth Games Village in the East End of Glasgow is going to become partly a care home and partly housing, of which some 300 or so are going to be social housing. Another concern, just to mention, I have in housing is the private rented sector, which can be very good at times, but some of our most vulnerable citizens suffer at the hands of doubtful private landlords or agents in a way that I know they would not suffer if they were with a community-based housing association. But today's debate appears to be yet another list of Labour wishes. 2 weeks ago, they were telling us they wanted more money spent on expensive cancer drugs, even though presumably that meant cuts in housing and transport. Last week, they told us they wanted more money for transport, even though presumably that would have meant cuts in medicines and housing budgets. And this week, they tell us they want more money for housing, even if presumably that means cuts in drugs and transport. So when will the Labour politicians join us in the real world? The reality is we have a pretty much fixed amount of money. All parties are welcome to tell us that they would spend more on housing and less elsewhere, but they should tell us where these savings would be. On the other hand, they could spend the housing money differently. For example, we can have a higher percentage of HAG, but fewer houses, or a lower percentage of HAG and more houses. Or we can have more specialist houses, which tend to be more expensive, but fewer of them. And that was, in fact, suggested at the Finance Committee when we did our recent demographic change report. These are all valid choices, but we expect politicians to disagree over these and to give us their alternatives. I've only got 4 minutes, and I'm sorry I'm in the last minute. Reality is some housing associations do have free reserves on top of their cyclical and designated reserves. And of course, such reserves can only be used once, but that is not to say they should not be used at all. For example, one housing association in my constituency has bought flats fairly recently off the shelf from a private developer. They may not be up to the high spec that we normally get from housing associations, but it has meant more social rented housing in the area, and I very much welcome that. So if we can get more houses for less public money, even if it's only for a few years, that is a good route when money is tight. The idea of savings and reserves is a good one. We need that throughout society, and especially for housing associations. And of course, there must be ring-fenced reserves, but if they're free reserves, let's see them used. So in conclusion, let's support community-based housing associations. Let's make housing our #1 priority. But yes, let's also be realistic, Presiding Officer, that Scotland's budget has been cut, and that is a sign that the UK system has failed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now call on Alex Johnson to be followed by Jim Eadie.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful for the opportunity to take part in this debate, and I would like to congratulate Paul Martin for securing it. I'd also like to apologise for not having signed the motion in his name. I perhaps overlooked it on the basis that it did, at first glance, appear to be Glasgow and Provan orientated, but having reread it prior to this debate, I would have been content to have added my name to it. Community-based housing associations have been playing a major role in providing high-quality, affordable housing for many years. I believe that their sophisticated knowledge of local housing needs means that their contribution to building sustainable communities cannot be overestimated. With high levels of build quality, community-based housing associations also do fantastic work in helping to keep people above the fuel poverty line. But it's not just about bricks and mortar, because, as I've said in this chamber many times before, Awarding a tenancy to a household is not and never will be the only solution to the issues that they may face. It's here, I believe, that housing associations really come into their own, with levels of support which can help those households who are vulnerable to maintain their tenancy for the longer term. Tenancy participation, although not the sole preserve of housing associations, is an important area in which it excels. It also gives people the real voice in their neighbourhood which they need, and an undoubted sense of empowerment which they can also have a powerful impact in other areas of their lives. It's against this backdrop of exceptional work by housing associations that the latest housing statistics, which were released yesterday by the Scottish Government, make grim reading. Housing association starts showed an astonishing 38% decrease from the previous year. Completions by housing associations also make grim reading. They're down 32%. This is not the fault of housing associations. They find themselves in a position where the Scottish Government subsidies have been slashed beyond reason, leaving them with stark choices for the future, with many choosing to mothball sites and cancel developments. Many people pay the price for these Scottish Government spending choices. Those languishing on waiting lists, those employed directly by the construction industry, and those who supply the tradesmen with everything from sandwiches to cement, are all paying the price. Of course, the Scottish Government can point to an increase in the local authority housing starts, which are up 45%, but the sting in the tail of that is that completions are down by 13%. I welcome these few positive figures, but let's look at the reality of the situation. Such as the funding landscape created by the Scottish Government, it is really only local authorities who can currently afford to undertake prudential borrowing to build. There comes a point, however, when it's no longer prudent to borrow. When it gets to that point, neither local authorities nor housing associations will be building, leaving us with the unedifying but increasingly common sight of the Scottish Government looking like a rabbit caught in the headlights of a rapidly approaching juggernaut. I have heard during the course of my contribution the continuous complaints coming from the left-hand side about the fact that somebody else has dictated their budget to them. Yet anyone in this chamber who has taken the trouble to look at successive budgets in recent years will see that housing has been targeted for disproportionate cuts across successive budgets. It is that decision by the Scottish Government, the decision that housing can do with greater cuts than other areas of expenditure, that brings the blame from any previous government or any current government in the UK right back to the doorstep of the Scottish Government and this Housing Minister.
Thank you very much. Now call on Jim Eadie to be followed by Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to congratulate Paul Martin for securing this debate this afternoon. It's right that we recognise the vital work of community-based housing associations, as I know that my constituency is far from unique in having dedicated housing associations who work to improve the communities in which they are based and to make a lasting contribution to people's lives. The Scottish Government recognises the vital role that social housing plays. And as Alec Johnson said at the start of his speech, it went downhill from there. This is about more than bricks and mortar. It is about giving children a safe place to grow up. It's about allowing young people the chance to get onto the property ladder. And it is about providing older people with a comfortable and warm place to live. The Scottish Government is committed to ensuring this becomes a reality for all. And in a context of squeezed public resources, as John Mason reminded us, we have seen the completion of almost 12,900 additional homes, and we are now 2 years into a 5-year target of delivering 30,000 new social and affordable homes in Scotland. Almost 10,000 of the homes completed to date in the last 2 years are for social rent. And by the end of April 2013, the Scottish Government had allocated £200 million in additional funding for housing supply, bringing the total investment to almost £860 million in the 3 years to March 2015. And I think it's important to have those facts on the record.
Paul Martin.
I thank the member for giving away. Does it concern the member, though, that the clear position now that we find ourselves in is that community-based housing associations are now withdrawing from development because of the lack of grant subsidy that's provided to them.
But I think the member has to recognise the financial realities within which the Scottish Government is operating because of the very difficult circumstances that we find ourselves in. And these difficult circumstances are the swinging cuts in the budget for housing supply imposed by Westminster. They are the challenges facing the housing construction industry, as Kenneth Gibson reminded us. They are the refusal of banks to release finance to housing associations, exacerbating the financial pressures on the smaller housing associations that he mentions and which Dr Elaine Murray referred to in her contribution. And the pressures are also the welfare reforms that are set to penalise the most vulnerable people in our society. These are the realities that we all must face. Presiding officer, I can't see the time in the clock.
90 seconds, please.
Sorry. Edinburgh Southern, my constituency, is served by a number of housing associations such as Cairn, Dunedin Canmore, Trust, Viewpoint, Castle Rock, Edinburgh and Beeld. And they all are making a contribution to providing tenants with affordable homes and a decent place to live, as well as providing the opportunity and support needed to people to thrive in their own communities. The Scottish Government continues to provide the support and investment necessary within these difficult pressures, despite the obstacles placed in its path. One organisation making use of this support is the Dunedin Canmore Group, who are headquartered in my constituency. And I was glad to learn that they are seeking to protect and empower communities that are affected by digital exclusion, by launching the Positive Pathways Initiative to provide computer access and intensive one-to-one support to help people who risk losing benefits because they don't have access to the internet or the skills to do so. And this was made possible by a grant of £200,000 from the Scottish Government, representing just some of the £2.5 million made available to social landlords to help tenants access this type of advice. Likewise, Trust Housing Association, also headquartered in my constituency, provide 2,500 people in Scotland with a range of housing options. And Trust have been actively contributing to the local community by providing a very valuable service by accessing funds through the Change Fund to develop a meal service for the benefit of the whole community so that residents and local people alike can get a decent meal no matter what their individual personal financial circumstances are. Castle Rock Edinburgh have accessed part of the £1.5 million Community Jobs Scotland Fund, and that is giving opportunities to young people in my constituency to gain valuable work experience. The Chief Executive of Castle Rock Edinburgh, Alistair Steele, stated that he found working with the Scottish Government to be a hugely positive experience and to find them very supportive in the development of new funding models. The Deputy First Minister said in evidence to the Infrastructure and Capital Investment Committee in November 2012, resources have been efficiently used and we have ensured that we get bangs for our bucks. For every £3 we invest, we are levering in a further £7.
Many thanks. I now call on Patricia Ferguson to be followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I begin by thanking my colleague Paul Martin for bringing this important debate to Parliament today. I know of Paul's long and very strong commitment to the Community Housing Association movement, and it is fitting that it is he who leads our debate today. Secondly, I would want to offer a warm welcome to all of those members of Housing Association management committees and the staff who have come here today to listen to our debate. Housing Association and indeed Housing Co-op members are volunteers who work hard to make improvements in their communities, with support from staff members too. And for that, they deserve our sincere thanks. Maryhill and Springburn constituency is blessed with a large number of excellent housing associations, Presiding Officer, some big and some small, but all of them making a substantial contribution to the life of our communities. I may not be able to mention all of them in my contribution today, but I hope to be able to provide some examples of the important work they do, which typifies the contribution made by all. At this present time, housing associations are struggling to cope with the changes to the benefit system as it affects their tenants. They are trying to mitigate the worst effects of those atrocious and ill-advised reforms by providing good advice to their tenants and by taking practical steps like linking up with credit unions to help those who don't have a bank account. At the same time, they have to try to ensure that their own income levels are not depleted as a consequence, so that they can continue to provide the high level of service that is the hallmark of the housing association movement. And over the years, I have witnessed some excellent innovation from the local housing associations in my constituency, such as the Self-Build project operated by Maryhill Housing Association, where local people built their own homes from scratch and worked hard to help their neighbours build theirs too. The commitment to excellent design that has been the signature of Queen's Cross Housing Association's developments over the years. The efforts NG Homes have made to incorporate community facilities and retail units into their new build properties, helping to build communities, not just homes. And the confidence that led Blocairn Housing Association to invest in its biggest ever development on a difficult site in a community where new houses of mixed tenure were needed. And the way in which housing associations across my constituency have renovated older properties, bringing them up to standard and saving important landmark buildings in the process is also very welcome. But of course, in recent years, the picture has begun to change. No longer do we see new build housing springing up all over the constituency, from Sparview and Copperworks to west of Scotland. Housing associations are no longer building new homes because HAG funding cuts make it practically impossible for them to do the job they were created to do. One housing association told me yesterday that they have identified a funding gap of £26,000 per unit based on the HAG grant levels and their existing rent levels. Without a proper level of development grant, they either have to expose themselves to extremely high risk on the financial markets or make the decision not to build. And frankly, that is the decision that most of the housing associations I know have already made. Unless they are given specific one-off grants for reprovisioning, they will no longer build new houses. Presiding Officer, it's no wonder that headlines this week tell us that there are fewer houses being built in Scotland now than during the Great Depression, with 40% fewer new starts in the first 3 months of this year alone compared with last year. And the irony is that the need for more houses to stimulate the economy and to provide local jobs has rarely been greater. And the changes brought by the bedroom tax mean that there is a pressing need for more smaller properties. Presiding Officer, I hope that the Minister will think again and restore HAG grant to a level that allows our housing associations to grow and to thrive and to build warm, affordable houses and good and stable communities.
Many thanks. And due to the number of members still wishing to speak in the debate, I'm minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Mr Martin, would you do us the honour?
I move, President Officer.
Many thanks. And the question therefore is, are we agreed that we'll extend the debate by up to 30 minutes? Yes. We are. I now call Bob Doris to be followed by John Pentland.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Even though I don't agree with the terms of motion before us by Paul Martin, can I thank him for bringing this issue to the floor of the Scottish Parliament, which is an important one. I couldn't sign the motion because I believe it's incomplete. It's in complete denial of the 26% capital cuts coming from the UK Government, and under those circumstances I simply couldn't support the motion. Can I also put on my record that probably the greatest challenge facing the housing association movement are the welfare reforms coming from the UK Government, and I have to say not just the bedroom tax issues, which has got much publicity, but probably a bigger challenge will be the reform to DLA and the introduction of personalised independence payments, which will deprive a lot more constituents actually of monies they need to pay their rents than actually the bedroom tax does, as horrible as the bedroom tax currently is. I want to put all that on record. Can I also put on record my apologies for not being able to meet the representatives of Glasgow's Community-Based Housing Association movement earlier on today. I was in a meeting in relation to trying to develop a fairer system and access to new medicines, including end-of-life cancer drugs. I hope you can appreciate that was an important meeting for me to go to and to attend, and that's why I couldn't be outside Parliament and meet with them. I know there's a number of community-based housing associations here which will mention some of the work they've done, hopefully, if time allows, during my speech. I have to say gently to Paul Martin that I can't take any lessons from the Labour Party in relation to supporting community-based housing associations. There's larger, stronger community-based housing associations in North Glasgow because it was actually a Scottish National Party government that got moving in second stage transfer from the GHA. So we now have a larger Maryhill Housing Association, we have a larger Queen's Cross Housing Association, we have a larger NG Homes, because this government got community-based housing associations motoring and delivered in second stage community-based transfer of housing associations. Yes, Mr Martin.
Paul Martin.
I wonder if the member accepts that the graph that I illustrated, the graph that you've received a copy of, clarifies that the grant levels provided to those community housing associations you referred to has reduced from 74,000 to 34,000 during the tenure of the Scottish Government since 2007. Do you accept that figure or not?
Bob
I want
Doris.
to speak very specifically about those figures later, but I think there was a Freudian slip from Mr Martin. You began by saying the gaffe, and I think part of your speech was an absolute gaffe by denying the reality of building social houses in Glasgow and Scotland. So no lessons in relation to community-based housing associations. Let's talk about some of the hag realities. Mr Martin, of course, makes a reasonable point in terms of what you either have to do is put more capital expenditure into building new social houses, in which case other parties have to see where that would come from. They fail to do that, or what you do is you lower the hag levels to allow more houses to be built, or of course, as Mr Mason suggested, you don't lower the hag level and less houses are built. So this government has made a political decision which we'd like to do more on, incidentally, but I have to say no other party is prepared to make a political decision, and that's an absolute cop-out, and it shows an opposition party not fit to be in charge of housing policy in this Parliament, I have to say. One other thing I would say to Mr Martin in relation to capital expenditure is the Labour opposition mentioned capital expenditure when it suits, capital expenditure cuts when it suits them, and not when it doesn't suit them. So, for example, when you look at the real terms increase to our NHS budget, that is a dramatic investment in NHS in this country, but the capital budget has went down because of UK cuts, and that's something, say, Miss Bailey, your health spokesperson, fails to take into account when she's looking at health budgets. So it's an inconsistent, incoherent message in relation to... I think I'm running short of time, Mr Johnson. I apologise. There's one or two more things I want to say. I want to look at some positive aspects, however. In the 3 years up to 2015, Glasgow will receive £181 million in relation to housing association grant money, and on top of that, nearly £29 million reprovisioning money through the Glasgow Housing Association for demolitions. What I would like to say is I think Glasgow City Council... I'm in my final minute, Mr Scott. I realise that I did have an intervention. Let me just kind of put this in. Can I just say we need more flexibility on the grant arrangements under reprovisioning to allow greater access to local housing, whether it be transformational regeneration areas in Maryhill or in Sighthill, where the Youth Olympics is hopefully coming to town, and there's going to be an additional 400 social units built as a result of that. So we need more flexibility.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Now call on John Pentland.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Paul Martin for bringing this motion to the Chamber, highlighting the important role of community-based housing associations. In my constituency, I have several organisations with properties, such as Garrion, Forgewood and Wishon District, all with very specific local areas. Others, such as Lanarkshire Housing Association and Clyde Valley Housing Association, cover bigger areas and are extending the geographical areas that they cover, but still there remains the strong community links. Garrion and Forgewood, for example, are both community-based housing cooperatives set up by stock transfer in 1990 and 1994, respectively. Garrion operates in the Gowthrapple area of Wishaw, while the other operates in Forgewood area of Motherwell. They work closely with each other, sharing management and other resources. Both offer a wide range of housing opportunities, consulting and involving the community in key policy and other decisions. Gowthrapple in particular has benefited from the Garrion's creation of a community hub. Like all good housekeepers, they watch the pennies carefully to ensure that the cooperative provides a value for money service base because, after all, their customers are their shareholders. Wishon District were established in the first wave of community-based housing associations in 1978. Their initial aim was to improve and rehabilitate local housing provision, starting with turn-of-the-century tenement flats that lacked amenities and were often structurally problematic. Since 1990, they have turned their attention to building new housing which we have been doing since 1990. Wishaw and the two co-ops both aim to provide high-quality, affordable homes for rent, but they also help people to own their own homes via schemes such as shared ownership. In more recent times, however, they have been severely hampered by tight funding and reduced allocations per property. Grants per unit have fallen from 60% of the cost of construction to below 40% and almost halved in cash terms. This has, of course, made new build more difficult and restricts housing associations' capacity to buy and develop new sites. Looking to properties with higher rents to offset this has been made more difficult by welfare reform, which is also undermining income from existing tenements. All are being encouraged, I just want to move on. All are being encouraged to use up their reserves, but these can only be used once, and when they are left without anything to fall back in adversity. Now, this runs counter to the prudential approach recommended by the Scottish Housing Regulator to meet the risks of the current economic climate. All organisations need to set aside contingency resources. To operate with fingers crossed and nothing goes wrong is simply irresponsible. Financial capacity is also being affected by the wider financial situation. Borrowing is more difficult, with some lenders using more borrowing as a reason for seeking to reprice existing loans. Pressure is increasing for existing stock, and housing associations' ability to undertake major repairs and renewals, including meeting higher energy-efficient obligations. Presiding Officer, there is a great strength in being community-based in terms of accountability and responsiveness to local needs. But Scottish Government should not jeopardise this by stretching community-based housing association resources to the point where it affects their ability to do the job that they have been doing so well for the last 40 years.
Thank you very much. And we now move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Officer. And I'd also thank Paul Martin for bringing this subject to the Chamber. It's not something that I'm wanting to shy away from. It is an important issue. And I just returned this morning from the annual conference of the SFHA, where I paid tribute to the housing associations and the positive differences they make to people's lives and communities. And I know that would not be possible without the dedication and commitment of the voluntary board members and the professionalism and hard work of their staff. So I'm pleased to be able to reiterate that today for the Community Housing Association members that are here. As we've heard from other members, vibrant communities are about more than houses that people live in, and the Scottish Government recognises the huge contribution that community-controlled housing associations make to the well-being of their tenants and their neighbourhoods. And for example, in North East Glasgow, Wellhouse Community Trust's People's Gateway project, supported by Wellhouse and Provenhill Housing Association, is helping to tackle antisocial behaviour and to provide outcomes for young people. Our £7.9 million People and Communities Fund will contribute to the total project cost and support this important work. And I think it was Bob that said that Glasgow receives a significant share of Scottish housing resources and has a 3-year supply budget of £181 million. And that's not all we're spending in Glasgow. There's separate funding for Glasgow Housing Association of nearly over 28 million, and also recently the Greener Homes Innovation Scheme, of which housing associations got funding of over 5 million. We have shared equity programmes which help first-time buyers. And over the last 6 years, the funding to Glasgow City Council has been in excess of £800 million. So to meet national targets, Glasgow needs to deliver strongly in housing, and the role of community-controlled organisations in this is vital. And yes, there are significant pressures being faced by housing associations. We've got the impact of the cuts that we've heard about from the Westminster Government. We've also got the impacts of welfare reform. So I think it was a bit of a neck for Alec Johnson, whose party in Westminster has imposed those in Scotland, to suggest that in some way it was the Scottish Government, and my fault in particular. So I think really we're taking no lessons from the Tories and what they're doing. But housing associations have responded magnificently. They understand the pressures that we're under, and we will continue to encourage the strong community anchor organisations to explore further financial and service innovations. I'll give way.
Paul Martin.
So the Minister refers to housing associations. Can I pose a question they posed to me? Will you reverse the cuts of housing association grants from 74,000 to 34,000? Will you reverse that cut?
What I'll say to, if Paul Martin can come up with a strategy and show me where that money is in the settlement that we have from the Westminster Government, the same settlement that your government is going to carry on with, then I'll talk to you more strongly.
As the debate becomes more heated, I'd invite members to speak through the chair, please.
Despite swinging UK government cuts to our capital budgets, over 6,000 affordable homes were completed in the last financial year, bringing the total delivered in the 6 years of the SNP government to over 40,000 additional affordable homes. This compares with less than 32,000 delivered in the previous 6 years by previous administrations. That is, 8,000 more families have been housed and helped into affordable homes by this SNP government. And that's the figures stack that up for that. So members may be aware, and indeed may have attended, as some have said, the lobby outside Parliament today by the Glasgow West Federation. Their paper from last autumn called for a rolling 3-year housing programmes, something we announced in March. It asked us to look again at subsidy rates, funding for acquisitions, payment on completion and management of risk. And we're discussing all of these issues with the sector, including GWSF right now. I'm clear we need to address these challenges, and we need to address them together. And I recently set up a short life working group to advise on these issues, such as affordable rents, financial capability, and housing associations and councils are all represented in this group, and we look forward to receiving their advice. The first 2 meetings of the group have been positive and have taken full account of evidence of the current issues from all involved. But let me also emphasise that every time this Scottish Government has had an opportunity to increase housing investment in Scotland, we do so. By the end of April, we had allocated £200 million additional funds for new affordable homes, bringing the total to almost £860 million in the 3 years to March. I'll take an intervention.
In his introductory speech, Paul Martin mentioned Labour's abysmal record in building poor quality houses in Glasgow, houses that had to be dynamited in their tens of thousands in subsequent years. Can the Minister confirm that social-rented houses are being built now to the highest possible standards?
Minister.
Yes, absolutely. The houses are being built to very high standards now, and that's something that when I go around visiting housing associations and new developments, that I have a great pleasure in seeing that we have these standards and people have homes. I'm running out of time, sorry, I would have, but I'm really running out of time. I have a few things to say because the criticism has been put on the Scottish Government, and we're working with the sector to try and deal with the challenges together, because we have not said there are no challenges here. And specifically in welfare reform, I've written to Westminster Scottish Affairs Committee with evidence of the problems that this will create for social tenants and landlords in Scotland. And I'll continue to press the UK Government as hard as I can on this, and particularly on the bedroom tax. And I have to say, because political issues have been raised in this debate, that the SNP government, we are the only party that have said that we will scrap the bedroom tax. No one else has said that, and that should get out there. You have no, the Labour Party have not said it, and we heard Ed Balls the other day making it very clear that they would continue with the bedroom tax, as will the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats. So if we want some truth and facts, that's a fact. We are doing all we can to lessen the impacts of welfare reform, but there are no easy answers. We still need strong programmes to meet growing housing needs, and we must use public money effectively. We might be 5 years on from the credit crunch, but we're still dealing with its fallout, and not least the problems some housing associations face with banks and lending conditions. And I'm raising that matter next week with the lenders, because they have to be told the issues it's causing in jobs and in terms of housing associations and the financing. But to conclude, Presiding Officer, at this time of financial constraint, the focus should be what together we can achieve, and not just about providing the same amount of money as in the past. It's about how we deliver efficiency and value in the housing programme while continuing to meet housing needs across Scotland to make sure people can live in a high-quality, affordable homes in sustainable communities.
Many thanks. And I now suspend this meeting until 2:30. Thank you.